for tonight. And before I introduce her, I would like for you to like and share this on your timelines. We have been working really, really hard around the clock to make sure that we had great interviews, not only with bishops, but interviews with the leaders of the church, interviews with public and elected officials, because we want to open up the doors. Not everybody is able to come to Orlando, but we want to make sure that Orlando is able to come to you. So with that being said, go ahead, like, share, tell us what district you're from, tell us what church you're from. If you're a delegate, if you're here, let us know. We want to make sure that we make this as engaging as possible. Tonight's guest is the very esteemed pastor of the Mount Zion AME Church in Dover, Delaware, and also serves as the connectional president of Women in Ministry. I'm excited to introduce somebody who I've known and loved from afar, the Reverend Erica Crawford. Welcome to the Let Out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, to you and the Christian Recorder. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, no, we're glad to have you because on Sunday, as I was preparing for my trip down to Orlando, I looked on my Facebook and I saw a link to a letter that was just, when I read it, my jaw dropped and my heart began to flutter, because I believe that the words that were spoken on this letter communicated with so many different people who had so many different thoughts and opinions and feelings coming towards the General Conference. So tell us a little bit about this letter that you were the author of.
All right, and I wrestled in my spirit about what to say, but I'm also clear as the president of Women in Ministry, which is an advocacy organization and not a fellowship group, that I had a responsibility to advocate on behalf of the clergy women serving in the AME Church. And so what resonated with me is that Sunday was the 4th of July. Frederick Douglass had written a letter, what to the slave is the 4th of July. And in questioning, how Black people, African Americans, people of African heritage celebrate the 4th of July when it doesn't have the same meaning. And so for me, it raised the question for me, the consciousness of the church, that coming to the General Conference for clergy women in particular does not come with the same level of excitement, enthusiasm, representation as it does for men. And so I wanted to raise the church's consciousness about that in the clergy delegation, women make up less than 20% of the clergy delegation. In a church that is predominantly women, the overall delegation is not predominantly women. And so I wanted to raise the church's consciousness, because we can't change something unless we recognize something.
My God. So one of the things I really enjoyed about the letter was the challenging of the church as it relates to the selection of delegates. And one of the observations I made my first day here, I was in the observer's room, and I noticed, and it was particularly contextualized by your letter, that as I looked around the observer's room of these people that travel during a pandemic where we're still seeing variants with their clergy collars on, and they happen to present themselves to be women in the observer's room. And I would say it was about 90 to 95% of the people who were clergy in that room were women. At the same time, we're not certainly sure how reflective that majority is in the delegations here. So to speak a little bit about that, particularly as somebody who's a seasoned pastor in the church.
The church has made progress. So I don't mean to articulate that the church has not made progress. The challenge is when most delegations are chosen, elected, slated, however an annual conference does it, we usually take the top pastors, right? The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pastor. But when women are not seated in those churches, then that means they automatically are disenfranchised, because they don't pay the largest budget, because they don't hold the lead positions. And as a result, they don't have a lot of the politicking, the experience, the skills, the names, the networking that come with those lead positions. And so when we look at the delegation, what we're really seeing is a true reflection of the seating of women in the appointments of churches. Okay?
Wow.
We celebrate the Reverend Elaine Flake being at the flagship church of African Methodism, right? But she is not the norm. We can name 5, 6, 7 women who are at connectional churches or lead churches, but that is not the norm. So when the women are at the bottom, I know one particular annual conference, 33 churches, 27 of them are pastored by women, right? But the women are at the bottom.
Wow.
And so the delegation the seating of the delegation is a reflection of the appointments of women.
So I want you to speak a little bit about that in terms of its impact on the day-to-day functions of the General Conference. Because for those who are watching who may not be AME, the General Conference is not just where we come to elect bishops or to assign bishops, but it's also where we deal with legislation.
Absolutely.
Particularly with what happened today, I just think it's almost ironic that Bishop Messiah was brought up on charges of taking money from widows. And how is that almost analogous to a church that has become majority women, that we take the money from women, but then it's not the women who become represented in the room?
Right, and it's a struggle. It's a double-edged sword because indeed women are pastoring. We are raising budgets. We are faithful in our responsibilities, but it's almost like the citizens of Washington D.C. Right? It's taxation without representation. And my position is we're not asking the church for favors. Put the slate out there. And I think most people in the church, I think, want to do the right thing. I think most people in the church have a sense of justice. And I think if you allow people to really select the persons who they believe will represent their annual conference, you will see more women in the delegation. But as long as we have superpowers, choosing the delegation, it will not look just. The other issue is people say oftentimes that there are women delegates at the General Conference. But be clear, clergy women and lay women have different issues.
Right.
And so when legislation comes out, when it comes time to vote on issues and matters related to the General Conference, women are not a monolithic group. So you can't say, well, there were 10 women from your annual conference delegation, but if there were 10 lay women, they do not represent the clergy women from that delegation.
So even in your experiences as a pastor, it may not be your direct experiences, but even in your connections with colleagues around the connection, have you seen that even some lay women may carry some of the mindsets about women in ministry, that and could that be one of the differences that you see with some, not all of them? We're not making this assumption about all lay women, lay delegates, but I know lay women who do not want a woman as pastor. And it's not that they don't believe in women in ministry, but they don't want a woman as a pastor. Right. So how do you see that as a dynamic that's at play in the General Conference delegation?
Certainly. I've had that challenge myself, right? To go into a church with people who had never served with a female pastor. So that comes with its own struggles. The issue becomes, for me, and I think for most of us in the church, it's a justice issue.
Wow.
It's a justice issue. So it's not that I want to see my sister have this. It's I want to see justice, and justice includes my sister. And I think we have to be more intentional in the church. Certainly, I've had people say to me, well, the women in ministry ought to speak up for themselves. The reality is, the power is not in the hands of the women in ministry in most places. So those who are seated in power have a responsibility, should feel a call to justice, particularly since we are a liberating church.
Right. Liberating and reconciling.
Since we are liberating church. So my question is, what is your responsibility to live out justice in the church that we advocate for in the street?
So what does that justice look like in the makeup of the General Conference? And I want to just make another pause here for those of you who may be peering into African Methodism. In Methodism, conferences are not simply the convenings. They're not simply the meetings. Conferences are the bodies that come together. That's why when you look at our conferences, when we come to general conference, it's often called the quadrennial session of the general conference. And so what does justice look like in the makeup of the general conference body?
I think it could be approached a number of ways, but even the simplest of formulas. If you're in an annual conference and 60% of the pastors are women, simply 60% of the clergy delegation should be women.
Right.
It can't always be based on money. And I say that as a person of color in the United States. That if we let people in the United States who had money control everything, people of color would have nothing.
Wow.
And so we cannot disenfranchise people in the church in a way that we would not allow ourselves to be disenfranchised outside of the church.
So speaking of disenfranchisement, that seems to be a theme this week. Whether it's been technology, whether it's been some of the feelings of our African delegations, and then even during this vote today, as it related to the case of Bishop Messiah, in what ways has the church done well to allow and open up discussion about the issues and to speak up on behalf of people to be able to advocate for themselves? And which ways does the church need to do better, particularly in your experience this week in general conference?
This has been an interesting week on multiple fronts. I will say, I think the church wants to do well.
Right.
I think the challenge for us as a church is understanding that sometimes doing well means that you have to be inconvenienced to help other people be in the same place. And so the challenge with technology, and for my global presidents and women in ministry, and I spoke with some of them before I came here this evening, and their frustration and just being able to communicate with them. I hear you, what Bishop McKenzie said at the opening day. I hear you and I see you. My dismay is I can't fix it.
Right.
And it seems like we're not able to find the people to fix it. I hope that with the delegations meeting in multiple places and hearing people from different districts saying we can't hear, we can't see, we don't have our devices, that maybe this is our opportunity to feel on some level what it means to be disenfranchised.
That's good, Reverend Crawford.
We had a group come into the room and say we can't hear, we don't have devices, we don't. Okay, but what about the people who are across the seas who couldn't come into the room? So for one moment, you felt what people have felt like for 4 years. I celebrate the General Conference, but today as I thought about, our sponsorships, our speakers, our presenters, did we have anybody represent the global district politically?
Wow.
And it's just one of those things we don't think about. And I get it. We don't think about it because it doesn't impact us. But if we are a body, if we are a body, we have to be sensitive to those things.
That is such a brilliant observation. I'm going to put a pin in that. Let's take that into consideration about this next question. As a seated delegate of the General Conference, what was your take about the Bishop Messiah case today?
It's difficult. It's difficult to hear because I think when you develop relationships with people, I respect Bishop Messiah. I think he's a great person. It's always difficult to hear a report that doesn't shed a good light on somebody.
Right.
I think I was more frustrated to hear the global district saying we weren't heard, we weren't seen, we didn't get to participate. And so in some ways it feels like, it felt like sitting here in the United States making a decision that because we have the overwhelming number, that we made a decision that maybe it's not in line with their decision, I don't know.
Right.
But it almost felt like we had the power to make a decision that impacted other people, that based on the reports that came in after, they're saying that they didn't feel the same way, they didn't get heard. And I don't think there's anything worse than hearing somebody say they weren't heard. And so that's where my pain is with the challenge we're having with technology, is it possible that even if we missed one voice, that we made somebody feel like they were less than deserving of being a part of this body.
That's a very great point. And to that end, because Bishop Messiah has been recommended for location at the end of the general conference, that means that it's almost like spades. We got three in a possible, three in a possible slots for bishops.
Yeah.
And one of the common things whenever we come to general conference ever since the election of Bishop Ashdod Murphy McKenzie in 2000 is this question: well, how many women are we going to elect this year? Tell me about that question and how that question, as a woman in ministry and as the president of the Women in Ministry for the Connection, how that makes you feel.
Friendly amendment. The question is usually which woman
Okay, gotcha.
are we going to elect? We don't ever go to our local governments and let them say to us, which black person do you want us to put on the city council?
Wow.
We don't ever say to the school board, we don't allow them to say to us, which black person do you want us to hire? But we come to the church as if the church has a cap on how many women can serve in leadership.
Wow.
No, it's not which woman do we want. And we don't even want any favors. We want people who are good for the church.
Right.
And that includes women. So whether that's 4 women or whether that's 1 woman is up to God. But my job as a woman in ministry is to support all the women candidates and to advocate for all the women candidates. I'm insulted for someone to say, which woman do you want? Because we never ask the men, which man do you want?
I want to say that again. That was good. Can you say that?
It's an insult. And if you have a daughter, you would never allow somebody to say to your daughter, you cannot be on this team, you cannot have this job, you cannot sit in this seat because we've already met our quota of women. It's an insult.
Right.
And you, as a woman or a man, should be shamed to even raise them. Now that's just what it is.
So let me ask you this. Let's go back to the 1996 General Conference when Bishop Frank Curtis Cummings gave the Episcopal address, and he gave that first call to the General Conference that we must elect a woman. And I believe that there was a vote to put a quota on the bench for every year that there's an election that we must elect a woman. So I want you to touch a little bit on that, but then also, what does how do you think a quota in the delegation or a quota in the general board or a quota in terms of the election of general officers, how do you think that will affect the future of the church and the democratization of power in the church?
I believe a quota will work. This is my challenge with a quota. A quota says, I don't believe you have the integrity to do it on your own.
Wow.
So I have to legislate it. I have to force your hands. And if we as sons and daughters of God are in a place where we need to make the public declaration that we don't have the integrity to see the gifts and talents in women that we see in everybody else, then we need to go back to the throne room. Because that's not a good sign for the church. You should never have to force people who call themselves Christians to do the right thing. The right thing should be in you, and the right thing should come out of the good that is in you. And so we can force quotas, we can do it, but the quota doesn't fit your heart. If your heart isn't right, you'll put the people in the seat and still won't give them the respect.
Wow.
You'll put the people in the seat and still not give them the positions of power. The church shouldn't have to legislate justice if we are a justice church. There's gotta be something. Even Richard Allen, after he had denied Jarena Lee and saw her gift, said, you know what, I stand corrected. We don't have to change the discipline. We don't have to vote on this. Her gifts have created this space. And it's been 60 years, hear me what I say, 60 years since women have been fully ordained in the church.
Wow.
And we're still discussing how many women can serve in leadership?
Can you
60 years.
Can you, as we talk about that, the fact that it's been 60 years, can we call the name of some of the ancestors, the women who have paved the way, and talk about their, the how they have created this space and this platform and this opportunity for women and those who walk with the sisters and the siblings of the AME Church.
Yeah.
Just speak to their witness and call their names.
And I think that is one of the challenges in the church, is we really don't understand the history of women in this church. We don't understand that Jarena Lee had answered her call, and it was 9 years from the time she had answered her call before she finally got licensed. And still was not ordained in life. I mean, walked thousands of miles on foot proclaiming the gospel, left her children with somebody else in the name of the AME Church to do the work of God. We have women who were ordained and the ordination was revoked. We have women that
Could you tell them that story?
Yeah.
With Henry Neal? Go ahead.
So in the Second Episcopal District, ordained gifts, talents, graces, and then the annual conference, Bishop Jabaz comes and says, no. And then they bring it before the General Conference. And the General Conference supports that decision to revoke ordination. And the ordination comes before the General Conference over and over and over and over again, 6 or 7 times. The church votes no. Finally, the church votes to ordain women. And Carrie Thomas Hooper from the New York Annual Conference decides to run. And runs
for bishop.
Runs for the episcopacy. And people laugh at her because every time she runs, she gets less and less votes. But she is so committed to keeping the door open for a woman. And it is not until 2000 that it happens. I'm clear that women in ministry have had great advocates and allies in men and women. But I'm also clear that we are still climbing a mountain that says women have to prove themselves in a way that men don't. And there's something disingenuous about that. The reality is that even as I watched the debate, the discussion yesterday about the LGBTQ resolution and legislation, if we still fighting about women 60 years after ordination, I don't know what the brothers and the sisters who are wrestling with the church about the LGBTQ, I don't know what you do. We're still fighting about how many women, whether women can pastor. And so at some point, the church has got to look at itself in the mirror. At some point, as we look at elections on Saturday, the people in the delegation have got to look at the tickets that have been handed to them and ask themselves, are there people on this ticket who look like me or look like the people who love me? And if I'm not happy with the church, one of the things I have to be willing to change is what the leadership of the church looks like.
So let me ask you this, because that's such a very great salient point. What has, with all of the history and with all of the tension that you as a woman in ministry face, and so many of our sisters face, and mothers and aunties and cousins face in the church, what has kept you committed to the AME Church, particularly to even seek leadership in the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a woman?
I believe in the spirit of the AME Church. I believe in the importance of what the AME Church means to African American people of color. I believe that the church has not seen its best. And I believe that there are people, perhaps a remnant, that will shift the church and take it where it needs to go. And I believe if we leave, then we have set the church up for failure. So I'm committed to working to see the church at its best. And I'm telling you, some days I go to bed, tears in my eyes. Some days I go to bed frustrated. Sometimes I pace the floor and I'm just like, you can have this, God. But I also know that somebody has to be a prophetic voice. But and it comes with knowing that prophets don't live long.
Ooh. So I want you to take this moment, because we're coming to the end of our time. I want you to talk to some of the sisters in ministry around the connection who are feeling that same frustration, that are feeling that same unnerving, that they're contemplating whether or not this church thing is for them. Maybe I should go to another, or just their discouragement when they feel like their voices aren't heard in the delegate room, or they are not receiving the respect they believe they deserve in the annual conference. Speak to them if you can, please.
I preached a sermon, I think it was in the 13th few weeks ago, from the story of Gideon. And when God reached down for Gideon, Gideon basically said, I'm overwhelmed and underprepared. I can't do this. Do you know who I am, God? I come from the smallest, tribe of Manasseh. I don't have the tools. I don't have the resources. And God's response is, I will be with you. You are a great warrior. I say to the sister who is at the small church with the busted pipes and the leaking roof, who can't pay her budget. I say to the sister who can't get an appointment. I say to the sister who can't seem to figure out how to navigate the board of examiners. You are a great warrior. You may come from the least of the tribes, and you may not see the evidence. And that's what Gideon said. I don't see the evidence. Where is the evidence of the God who brought my people over, the God who had done all of these things? You may not see the evidence of what God has done. But I said to you, you are a great warrior, and God is with you. And if you just stay with God, people will rally around you. So many people will rally around you that God will allow you to release some people when you get ready to go into your victory. And that's what Gideon was able to do. When God got ready to take him into the victory, God said, you can release some of these people because they're just trying to ride your coat. And so I say to the women who want to give up, trust God. No matter where you have come from, no matter where you are, no matter what the journey has been, trust God. People may fail you, but God never fails. God never fails.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the
Reverend Crawford.
opportunity.
No, that was awesome. As we get ready to close, I would like to just share with our people that we have a lot of things happening this week. We want you to continue to be in prayer for the AME Church. We want you to continue to be in prayer for the goings on in this conference. I really believe that with your prayers, God's presence will be in the space. And if God's presence will be in the space, we will be the church that we were always called to be. See you tomorrow. We'll keep going? Okay. We're getting the go ahead to keep talking. So one thing I want to share. In 1999, my mother, the Reverend Dr. Dubai Sababu Thomas, received her PhD from Howard. She is the first person I ever saw preach. I literally was in her womb while she preached. And I've seen her preach all over the country, all over the world. And one day she went to go preach at a church. And for the first time in my life, I was about 13 years old. After she had received her PhD, she went to go preach at a church, and when they introduced her and told all of her accolades, she was made to preach from the floor. I was 13 years old. I had not taken a class on womanism yet. I hadn't read Alice Walker. I hadn't been exposed to Jacqueline Grant at that time. But I knew that there was something wrong with the fact that because my mother was a woman, that she had to preach from the floor. Now, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, women are not relegated, who are preachers are not necessarily relegated to the floor. But we must ask ourselves, particularly as men, how does our theology, how does our praxis keep women who may even occupy pulpits on the floor? How do we maintain systems that oppress, that objectify, and that only side with the women that we like? We must ask ourselves, and look at ourselves in the mirror, in the words of the prophet Micah, that God has shown us what is good. That only thing God requires of us is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So I ask that all of our members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, that we will examine ourselves, just as we are asked to do every communion Sunday, and see how are we complicit, and how do we add to the frustration and the pain of our sisters and siblings in ministry. Join us, make sure to join us tomorrow at 9 p.m. Hopefully before we will be able to get somebody from the African districts. Before we go, I want to make that connection that Bishop Adams once made, that even to our siblings over in the African districts, we are the overseas district. And so I would like to even challenge our language. So to our African districts, we love you. We hope to hear from you, and hope that tomorrow we will be able to be in contact with one of our siblings in our motherland continent. Amen. All right. See you tomorrow at 9 p.m. And we are grateful for you to log on. Thank you for coming out to the let out. God bless you.
Stand by.